I remember I've talked about this before, but I'm going to bring it up again. So, one of the ways that I call Goth, and not just the Goth movement, but hippies, punks, counterculture, as opposed to subculture, is because there's varying lines and aspects that are counter to mainstream. And I think what Punks for Progress was ultimately going for at saying that Lothier was not goth is his support of capitalism. I was almost kind of wondering if that was the route he was going down. Forget the fact that there are Nazi fascist punks, but aside from that, the idea, the biggest, most thought of idea behind the goth counterculture, the punk counterculture, and the hippie counterculture is anti-authoritarianism, is ignore the machine. From my personal perspective, if you were to take away, let's say, our democratic republic and replace it with communism or Marxism, socialism, anarcho-socialism, from my perspective, you're just taking away one machine and replacing it with another. So I like to try to ignore the machine. And in doing that, that puts me in a political category that's like if I were to look at like the extremes of my political philosophy, which I wouldn't advocate necessarily for, I definitely wouldn't advocate that an entire government system was ran under what I would like to see as like what my utopian dream would be. Ultimately, utopian dreams and idealism won't get you very far, and they lead you to dead ends, and they are pipe dreams, and they belong in the graveyard of your dreams. Just bury it. It's not going to happen. I would never advocate for an entire society, like an entire country like the United States, to go completely lawless. I wouldn't advocate for that whatsoever. That being said, a lot of people in counterculture do not necessarily follow the rules. And the thing is that these countercultures need to remain as countercultures and not overthrow the mainstream. If they become the mainstream culture, you no longer exist as the counterculture. You exist as the mainstream. You become the pop culture. So, an analogy that I've given about this in the past is I talk about the difference between being homosexual and gay. To me, gay is a counterculture, or is a subculture. The gay scene is very much a subculture of mainstream culture. It mimics things that come from mainstream culture, like diva pop, pop music in general, things that are popular, popularized, glamour, fashion. Punks, goths, hippies. Yes, there is a certain attire, a fashion associated, but you don't have to have the mohawk and the makeup and wear black all the time to be a goth. You don't have to dress up like a punk to be a punk. We do these things as signifiers to people around us to say, hey, this is what I am. So, we tend to be counter to the mainstream. Alien Sex Fiend has a song called Ignore the Machine, where it just talks about ignoring the machine. That these government systems in place, society, mainstream culture, is a machine. And to ignore it. So, people do this in different ways. I have grown up and come to the understanding that I have to live in this. I'm very DIY. I'm very, very independent. And I like being independent. So, that being said, I have to engage with the machine a little bit because we do have capitalism, we do have rules, regulations, and all that sort of stuff. So I do have to give into the machine a little bit. But when I start to see like a collaboration of people who are part of the machine and not part of the machine complaining about the same things, I think that says there's something that needs to be done. For instance, like I've brought up many, many times, corporatism, crony capitalism. These are things that are not just suppressing people who are against the machine. They're suppressing people that are part of the machine as well, and it's starting to feel like the only reason why major conglomerate corporations and those who are in power allow us to reproduce is because we're basically livestock. So, when that happens, we have a humanitarian issue at hand. And I think when we look at things like that, it's you look to the countercultures, and I think they're the ones that usually see it first. Because they're things that we complain about a lot. Part of our reasoning, one of the reasons, the problem with authority, not wanting to have to answer, like, I would totally love to be self-employed. That's the ultimate goal, because that does work within the machine's parameters. And it also helps me to be closer to where I want to be. But dreams and reality are two totally different things. It's not wrong to dream, and I think that it's not impossible to become self-employed. It's just very, very difficult. Especially because of crony capitalism. Pushing competitors down because, well, they offer some kind of competition. They're a threat to other businesses, and so they will hire lobbyists to try and suppress that down. Which I think is ultimately what's happened to YouTube, is media ownership. The big mainstream corporate media holders don't like that individuals are on here and they're capable of pretty much being their own media service. It was a way out of the machine to self-employment. And unfortunately, the machine struck down and said, no, you have to stop. Stop trying to take away our power and authority, etc., etc. So, I think it's important, though, for these countercultures to remain as countercultures, because I don't want to be part of mainstream popular culture. I like being separate from all of that. And I'm fine working within the parameters of the machine, but I think that counterculture exists as a polarity. We exist to remind people of a different ideology, of a different way of life. Some people express it through being a vagabond, Some people express it through communal societies. Some people express it by being hood rats, gutter punks, and the like, crust punks. And some people do go and get jobs and support themselves because they have that independent DIY attitude. Don't rely on others, rely on yourself, like myself. But ultimately, self-employment would be great. But that is a big difference between mainstream culture and counterculture. And I don't know why. I have no idea why these Antifa groups, the anarcho-socialists, anarchists, Marxism, socialist, communist people, are trying to overthrow the mainstream and become the mainstream. So you want to become the popular culture and get in the mix with what is inevitably running the machine. It's great not being able to step away from it's great being able to step away from the machine if you so choose. And it's also great being able to have one foot in halfway through the door and one foot on the other side. But the moment we become mainstream, then we have to work with the parameters of the pre-existing machine, which has a lot of, it's power hungry, and I just don't think that's a good idea. I think it's a better idea to be a counterculture, to be a culture within the mainstream, and exist that way. Exist as a polarity to the mainstream, an alternative. And oftentimes, the alternative happens to be the voice of opposition for a lot of things that occur. And that doesn't mean that, like, let's say, for instance, I want to have the government emulate my idealistic political philosophy. That would be a horrible idea. So it's better to exist within the machine as a counterculture than have your counterculture be the mainstream. It'll no longer be counter. And I think we lose some of our footing when we do that. Like I said, to me, replacing what we have, a democratic republic, with communism, socialism, anarcho-socialism, anarchy, well, not anarchy, anarchy is absence of government, but to replace it with those systems, it's just swapping one system out for another, and still I have a problem with authority. Now, what happens with some of these other regimes, these other systems, is if you have a problem with their authority, then it could be complete ostracization, up to and including death. And that's what it's shown in the past. Mob mentality, mob rules. This is why not everybody is ready for such a concept, which is why it needs to remain counter. Make people think. Now, who's to say that hundreds of years from now, we won't be capable of sustaining such a system, especially with full automation kicking in. We may have to turn to such a system. But humanity is not ready for total anarchy. There's too many people that participate in barbarism. They get brainwashed by bad ideologies and religion. People who committed the Spanish Inquisition The people who went on the Crusades, they absolutely thought that what they were doing was righteous. It was the will of God. They had no concept in their mind that there was something unethical about it, or something that might possibly, perceivably, be immoral. I don't believe morality is static. I believe it's subjective, but there are some things that I think most society agrees on in general. And one of those things is, don't kill. But when you live without a government, there's no one there to moderate that type of thing other than mob rule, mob mentality, brainwashed people. Brainwashing is not humane, but in anarchy, it flies. It's fair. The other systems, I could address, but looking at their history, they've been no different. That's the thing that we have to, I think, watch out for is extremism. People who get in their heads so much that they're so radical in their thinking, so overzealous, that they forget that they might be encroaching on other people's rights, liberties, and freedoms, and how they want to live their life. I want to live my life the way that I was blessed with a birth and a death, and I want some say in between. I don't want to be controlled and say, well, you can't have a mohawk. You can't dress like that. You can't behave this way. You can't be melancholic. Well, I don't really choose to be melancholic. That's just kind of how I am. Always been that way. Always been obsessed with death. Even when I was a little kid. I was bound to find Goth eventually. I was bound. It could have been called something completely different. I was bound to find it eventually, whatever that was that had that feeling, that had that emotive force that I was looking for, that dark, kind of macabre, glowery, melancholic aspect to it. I was bound to find it. Didn't matter what the name was. And I think that's the same with hippies and punks as well. And you have to keep in mind that not everyone is of that mentality. So we are counterculture. And I think that's how we should remain. It's counterculture. I don't want to be a part of mainstream. I don't want to be a part of the machine. I want to be able to exist within the parameters of the machine should I choose, or outside the parameters of the machine if I choose. But it's not an example of how the average everyday person goes about their life. It isn't. I think Antifa is a necessary voice considering our social political climate. However, I really wish that people would understand and wake up to the concept that some of these things are perpetuating a further divide instead of bringing people together. And if you are a true egalitarian and humanitarian, that would be the opposite of what you would want. So, we don't want to say to the oppressors, the people who wish to oppress others, we don't want to go up to them and say, if you give us your guns, we'll give you our bombs. That's a terrible idea. Absolutely terrible idea. So I want to advocate in a different direction of not perpetuating a divide, but solving that divide. And for a moment, I got multiple people from multiple political persuasions to talk to each other. An anarchical socialist was talking to a Republican or libertarian. So that at least I got two people talking, and I got them to interact with people of the alt-right, the neo-Nazi variety. So I guess the fact that they talked in an instant, I guess that's a good thing. That's a start. But we need to start talking to each other more often and having civilized discussions. I remember back in the day, nostalgia won't leave me alone. Nostalgia's poisonous. Because we can't live in the past. We have to live in the now. But I remember back in the day when I, as a liberal, used to be able to have civilized conversations with anarcho-socialists, anarchists, and communists even. And we would laugh and we would joke and we would talk about our differences, and it wouldn't be a big deal. And they understood the difference between a fascist and a right-winger. They understood these things. I don't know what happened in the current year to make everyone just completely lose their mind. And now suddenly we can't tell the difference. People don't know the difference between I as a liberal and an SJW, or I as a liberal and an anarcho-socialist. And people can't tell the difference between somebody who's just conservative right-leaning and a fascist. This is a problem that talking to people will solve. Because the more that we try to understand each other's points of view, the more that it will become apparent and abundantly clear to us what these things look like, what they sound like, what the actual ideology is. And you also have to keep in mind that the political compass, the four-quadrant political compass, is vast. And there's a lot of varying places that you could land on it. I've never described myself as a Democrat because to me Democrats are too authoritarian. Some Democrats are moving away from that, like Ocasio-Cortez. I don't support her. She has some weird ideas. Bernie Sanders, I really want a mixed economy. I would like to see a mixed economy. And we are the only Western first world nation left in the world that does not have a mixed economy. The social programs that we do have in place are trashed. They hardly even fucking work. Look at foster care, if you don't believe me. Go and look at how terrible foster care is doing. We still don't have health coverage. The health coverage that we have here in the United States, people in other Western first world nations laugh at us. It's laughable that a hospital, not even a hospital, but an ambulance ride could bankrupt a person over something stupid and simple. This is beyond a lot of their comprehensions. I've talked to people from other countries, and it's mind-blowing to them that we have the things that we have to go through here in the United States because of these things. Now, the thing is that the way that their tax system works over there, and there could be higher taxes if we have better social programs. That's true. But I do look at Germany as a great model for national health care because it's a choice. You pay a tax, that tax is deliberately allocated towards national health care. and their health care is just as decent as ours, and the wait times is just as much as less as ours. It's the same thing. You have to wait in a fucking waiting room until the doctor calls your name. Same thing. They have the same kind of structure, except they don't have to present a health insurance card, and it's not required by law either. Same with car insurance. When you start mandating things like that, you're stepping into the territory of dictatorship, dictating onto people. And that's where you start getting government-mandated schemes. Pyramid schemes, I guess. But car insurance is a ripoff. It's totally a scam. And we don't want to turn our health insurance into that. We don't want to turn any of our other social programs that we do have into that. And there are people that are legitimately, horribly disabled, that they cannot get a job, and if they do get a job, they will earn nowhere near a livable wage. And what we also have to understand, SSI, SSDI, these things do not give you a livable wage. A lot of states max out at a certain amount of money that a person can receive, and it's not a lot. It's even below the poverty line. So it's like, as the economy grew and inflation happens, society changes, it's like our social programs or social safety nets that we had in play were stagnant instead of growing with us. And I think that's something that we should be focusing on. And I think that, this corporatism, corporations impeding into our personal lives needs to stop. If you want my honest opinion, I think corporations work a lot like communism. What we understand of communism, how it worked in Russia when communism was alive. You have the uniformity, you have the collective thinking. We want you to say these things, we want you to act a specific way. Any type of criticism is downplayed. Corporations don't have a gulag, but they will waive the monetary sum, basically your livelihood, which is money, over your head and say, well, if you don't cooperate, then you'll lose your job. You could lose your means of being able to live, affording food, housing, amenities that you enjoy. And so that could be a metaphor for a gulag. And they'll tell you, well, if you don't like our company, you can go to another one that will let you do what it is that you want to do. But this is a false hope and promise, because in all reality, most companies demand the same thing across the board. And many of them are going onto social media and seeing what you do in your private life. And it's getting to a point where people can no longer really be a person. 70-hour work weeks are not something that's not acceptable. Should stick to the 40 hours, which is even higher than most other countries in Europe. I think many of their average hour work weeks are 35 hours. 40 is decent. And the amount of wage that we earn shouldn't be based on how many hours we work. I mean, certainly you should have overtime, but just because you get a promotion, that doesn't mean you take a decrease in pay because you're going to get more money because of the overtime. That's not how it should be. You get paid more money because you have more responsibility or you have a different job title that is above what you were doing. It's how promotion should work, not you have to work more hours then. This would open up a lot of opportunities for jobs. There's some aspects of legalizing things. Well, I'm going further in back. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked there, but going back into, like, companies have no business in what you do in your personal life, and it's getting to the point, as I was saying, that people don't even have the time to be a human being anymore. They don't have time for family, don't have any time for friends. It's like they go to work, they come home, and then they have all the social media to consume, and that's what life is anymore. It's sitting on your ass playing video games or watching TV, eating, going to bed, waking up, and predominantly your life is about having a job that you don't even have passion for, and they don't even allow you to express that you have no passion for it. They don't even allow you to be honest that you're just doing it for the fucking money. And it's like, why can't I not just be honest about that? Why can't we have, why not? Seriously. So it's important for countercultures to exist to remind people that it doesn't have to be that way. That the future should look like freedom. Not you are simply allowed to be put on this earth so that you can be livestock for the rich, wealthy, and powerful. You're a person, you're a human being, and you should have a social life, you should have friends, you should have family, and you should be able to engage with them. It's important. It's actually in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need it. Psychologically, we start to break down when we don't have this. So, I just thought I would point this out again. Counterculture needs to remain counterculture, not the mainstream. That's why I would advocate, I like the idea of a liberal democracy, although we live in a democratic republic. I'm fine with that. We have a lot of freedoms. I think we should legalize prostitution. We should legalize marijuana across the board. Put regulations on it, like stipulation on age, put warning labels, whatever. Don't drive while intoxicated, blah, blah, blah. That's all fine. That doesn't mean everyone will. But farming is something that's gone down big time in the United States. And these are things that are not unfixable. These are not idealistic utopias. These are things that we can fix. If we stop these power-hungry, these powerhouses, these multi-billion-dollar, multi-conglomerate corporations, from basically having more power than our own government, and holding them accountable for the atrocities that they do. That's not a utopian, idealistic anything. That's something that we absolutely can make happen. And, I mean, nothing will ever be perfect. But that's a step closer to progress. And that's where I see myself as being progressive, is that I want to see those changes. But I don't want to limit speech. And I don't want to go around calling people fascists and Nazis that aren't. I want to expose some of these multi-conglomerate corporations for the evils that they've done, and maybe arrange some boycotts on them until they get the message that if they shit on the people who are making their business happen, then the people will not endorse in their products, and they will hemorrhage money until they meet our demands, because they do not make the laws, they do not make the rules, and they should not be getting away with doing that. I think they should maintain the right to be able to fire people, if they're a terrible worker or whatever, if they commit some kind of... There are necessary rules they have that I can see people being fired for, and that's fine. But denial of workers' compensations, time punch skimming, time punch editing, selling rotten product to people, things that wouldn't pass USDA or FDA approval, working people till they're literally physically damaged. These are not acceptable things to do. And unfortunately, right now, there's nowhere for these employees to turn to. You go to the Labor Department and they'll tell you to hire an attorney. Because they don't have authority in that aspect, I guess. I think there should be some kind of authority, some kind of organization that can audit the company to prove the claim is correct and be able to hold them accountable, not with a slap on the wrist with these fines that they give them. That's a slap on the wrist for a lot of these multi-conglomerate corporations. They make that in a weekend. But when a CEO or shareholder or owner has to go to jail because they didn't audit their HR department properly, that might light a fire under them a little bit more. They might care a little bit more about how their employees are treated. We are not livestock. We're human beings. We're not bred specifically for the sole purpose of serving a multi-conglomerate billion-dollar company or billionaire. That is not why our parents made us. They made us to enjoy life. Yeah, I'm a fucking leftist. A liberal. But I'm not an SJW. And I think counterculture should remain counter, not the mainstream. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell button on any channel you subscribe to. And with that, out.